In 1896, one Supreme Court decision redefined America for nearly 60 years. It wasn't just a legal ruling, it was a decision that would dictate where people could live, learn, and even sit on a train. The case was Plessy versus Ferguson, and its story begins with a deliberate act of defiance. It started in Louisiana back in 1892. A man named Homer Plessy, who was 7/8 white and 1/8 black, bought a first-class ticket and sat in a whites-only railroad car. This wasn't a spontaneous act. It was a carefully planned legal challenge by civil rights activists. They wanted to prove that Louisiana's segregation law violated the 14th Amendment's promise of equal protection under the law. Plessy was arrested, just as planned, and the case began its journey to the nation's highest court. The activists hoped the Supreme Court would strike down segregation. Instead, in a devastating 7-1 decision, the court ruled against Plessy. The majority opinion introduced a phrase that would haunt American society for decades: separate but equal. The court declared that as long as the facilities provided to both black and white citizens were equal, separating them by race was perfectly legal and constitutional. This separate but equal doctrine became the legal bedrock for Jim Crow. Suddenly, segregation wasn't just a social custom. It was the law of the land. It justified separate schools, separate water fountains, separate hospital wards, and separate neighborhoods. But here's the reality that the doctrine conveniently ignored. The facilities were never, ever equal. Schools for black children received far less funding, had fewer resources, and were often dilapidated. Hospitals were understaffed and ill-equipped. Public services in black communities were systematically neglected. Separate always meant inferior, and it was all backed by the federal government's seal of approval. In the sea of agreement, one justice stood alone. Justice John Marshall Harlan wrote a powerful dissent, a lone voice of reason that would echo through history. He argued that the Constitution is colorblind and should not tolerate classes among citizens. He warned that the Plessy decision would one day be seen as just as infamous and damaging as the Dred Scott case, which had denied citizenship to African Americans. He was right. Plessy v. Ferguson legitimized racial discrimination for nearly 58 years. It took until 1954 for the Supreme Court to finally reverse course. In the landmark case of Brown v. Board of Education, the court unanimously ruled that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal, finally striking down the doctrine that had caused so much harm. Plessy didn't just affect train cars. It shaped the daily reality of millions of Americans for generations, proving that the Supreme Court has the immense power to either expand our freedoms or severely restrict them. Understanding our history is key to understanding our present. Thanks for watching. If you learned something new, be sure to like, subscribe, and share things you didn't know.